All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, I have to give James Harden and Russell Westbrook a lot of credit. And I've mentioned this in other videos. I've been hard on both those brothers, but the both of them have shown a great deal of maturity, especially Russell Westbrook. So that leads us to this video right here. Mr. Max Kellerman and Stephen Naismith are trying to discern who's under more pressure at this point in their careers. They're both about 29 years old. Right now, they're at the stage where they have to start winning, because in a couple of years, they're going to be on the downside. And the players who are 22, 23, 24 years old are going to be replacing them. So the time is now for Russell Westbrook and James Harden. And I know I stated I would not call them that anymore, especially James Harden. I really should be calling him James Harden, but he still does dumbass shit. He still does dumbass shit, man. It's very, very difficult. But I'm trying to get accustomed to calling him James Harden. In the meantime, Max Kellerman is going to make a very stern assertion about James Harden, and we'll see whether or not I agree with it. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
All right, fellas, another matchup between two stars going down in H-Town today. The Thunder, the hottest team in the NBA since starting the season 0-4. Russell Westbrook averaging a triple-double. The Rockets are currently in 8th place out west at 17-15. James Harden is leading the league in scoring, but will be without Chris Paul for the next 2 to 4 weeks.
James Harden, to me, is really becoming the Peyton Manning of the NBA. He puts up these illustrious regular seasons, and then he gets to the postseason and falls short. And it's not all his fault. It's because he receives the most generous whistle of any NBA superstar I've ever seen. And he becomes accustomed to that whistle. And then when he gets to the playoffs, he's no longer getting that whistle. And he's still playing that same regular season type of play where he barrels into players and throws up wild shots and flails and flops, expecting to get calls, and he doesn't. And he does not adjust. And then the fact that he's not particularly a superlative athlete. He's a good athlete, but he's not a transcendent athlete. So he gets to the playoffs and he keeps trying to flop and flail, doesn't get the calls, doesn't get the whistles, and he only knows how to play one way, which is one-on-one. In regards to Westbrook, I've seen a great deal of maturity in him this season. He has divested a lot of the control of the team over to Paul George. The real question is, will they be able to combine together to form the nucleus that they will need to win a championship? Of course, as of right now, the OKC Thunder, they have an outside chance of winning. The problem is Paul George is a beta. He's not an alpha. But he's more talented overall offensively than Russell Westbrook, especially as a jump shooter. Russell Westbrook has an alpha personality, but he just goes overboard with it. He gets out of control, and then he can't shoot. So they have a very strange mix. They still need another shooter. If they could get a Kevin Love from the Cleveland Cavaliers, especially if they did not have to really give up anything, maybe a first-round draft pick and a couple of bench players, that would really help them.
With a hamstring injury, Stephen A., former teammates back in 2012 NBA Finals, Harden or Westbrook, who has more to prove?
I think it's Westbrook. I'm not talking about today's game. I'm talking about period.
I think that both players have an equal amount to prove. They're both right now considered to be at the very peak of their powers, particularly when it comes to their athleticism, their experience, etc. When you're 28, 29 years old, that is when you need to start winning championships. That's when Jordan started. That's when LeBron started.
Westbrook's a former league MVP. Obviously, those are the two back-to-back. Those are the two back-to-back MVPs. Russell Westbrook a couple of seasons ago, James Harden last year. Both very deserving. Russell Westbrook is on the verge of averaging a triple-double for the third consecutive year. It's unreal.
Come on.
It's unreal.
Right. I mean, Russell Westbrook is a force of nature. I did a video about that a while ago. He's one of the top 10, if not top 5, natural athletes to ever play in the NBA, who also was a great player. There are a lot of great natural athletes who came through the NBA, but I'm talking about the ones who became great players. You have him, you have Iverson, you have Dominique, you have Vince Carter, Dr. J, Jordan, of course, Kobe Bryant. I mean, when you're making a list of phenomenal athletes who also became, considered great, quote-unquote, great players, even though I don't consider Russell Westbrook a great player. I think he plays great, but he's not a great player. It's a big difference. He's on that list. He's in that top 10.
Unreal, averaging 20, 10, and 10. Paul George is playing like a superstar, in case anybody's missing.
Well, he's playing like somebody who's very comfortable and who's been told by Russell Westbrook that I want you to be the top scorer on the team.
He's averaging 26 a game, okay? Paul George is flat out balling, 45% shooting, nearly 39%.
I would love to have seen Russell Westbrook go up against Gary Payton. I would have loved to have seen that shit.
From 3-point range, it is something special to behold what we're seeing from Paul George right now. And that is exactly why more pressure is on Russell Westbrook. Because how many players do you need before you ultimately capture a championship yourself?
Right, but Stephen A. Smith, come on. We know that Paul George is not good enough to lead a team to a championship, and Russell Westbrook is not good enough to lead a team to a championship. That's the conundrum that they're in. Once again, he has an alpha personality, but he does not have an overall alpha genetic makeup as an NBA player to win a championship. He's just not that guy. What do I mean by that? He does not have enough things that he can do, especially in big games, that can carry his team to victories. He's a force of nature. In the first round, second round, he can will his team to win a game or two in a series. But when you're talking about players who can carry their team to championships, it's a very, very short list. If we look at the last 40 years of basketball, basically we're talking about Jordan, Shaq, Kobe, Tim Duncan, Magic, Isaiah, Larry, Moses Malone. I mean, those basically are the guys. We could also throw Kareem and Dr. J in there.
You had James Harden
and Hakeem
years ago with Kevin Durant, Serge Ibaka, no doubt, but all of y'all were 21 and under, 22 and under, so we understand you were young. But then you had Kevin Durant and Serge Ibaka. Couldn't get that done. Then you had Paul George with Carmelo Anthony. That didn't work out. Now you have Paul George playing like a superstar.
Right, but Stephen A., what are you really saying? He had Paul George and Carmelo Anthony. Like, what are you talking about, man? It's like you're trying to create an argument out of nowhere. Carmelo Anthony can't play. He couldn't play for the last 3 years. There's only idiots like you on TV talking about how he could play.
You got 5 guys averaging in double figures. You got Dennis Schroeder.
Right, but that doesn't win championships. What wins championships is 3 great players or 2 great players and a very good player and role players who perform their role to the T. That's what wins championships. Not 8 guys averaging 10 points or more.
Dennis Schroeder out from Atlanta as your backup point guard, just flat out balling. Flat out balling.
I knew he was going to be a great pickup. I was telling my dad the other night, he reminds me a lot. He's like a Western Conference version of Terry Rozier, except he's a little better than Terry Rozier.
Averaging 16 a game coming off the bench for you, all right? And you got some young thoroughbreds that are able to come in there. And Steven Adams averaging 16 and 10. He's averaging a double-double. But the point that I'm trying...
Steven Adams is a great big man for this era. Great big man. Strong as hell. Great rebounder, tough. Great on the pick and roll.
That I'm trying to make to you is that you have depth, you have athleticism, and you have another star playing with you on that star-studded level. You're the 4th-ranked defense in the National Basketball Association. I'm looking at Russell Westbrook, knowing the mercurial superstar that he is.
Well, that's the problem. He's not a mercurial superstar. He's just mercurial. He's a mercurial star. Okay, Stephen A. Smith? A superstar. There's really only about 3, maybe 4 superstars per era. Right now, the superstars are LeBron James, KD, and Steph Curry. And on the outside looking in are Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Davis, Giannis, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Russell Westbrook. I would put Kyrie Irving above Russell Westbrook. I would take Kyrie Irving on my team before I would take Russell Westbrook. Just me.
And I'm saying, ain't too many people in NBA history that have been as blessed as you are to have the quality of teammates that he has had.
Right, but when he had them, they were all precocious. So let's be fair. Now we can say he had KD going into the mid to late 20s. You can say that. But unfortunately for Russell Westbrook and KD, they never had a real coach install a real system.
At some point in time, if he don't win, they're going to start talking about him like they did a couple of years ago when they said it's not Kevin Durant left because of you.
Well, I'm going to start talking about him now because he's not a great player. He just plays great. A great player basically plays great every night. Russell Westbrook plays hard every night. It's a big difference. He does not play great every night. When I say every, I don't mean every single game. But when you have a player like a Russell Westbrook shooting 41, 42%, I'm sorry. That's not a great player.
He could put in all of that.
This is a great question because they both have a lot to prove along the lines that you're discussing. But speaking of Paul George, if you look at players who can be described as threes in the NBA,
yeah.
Paul George, who's playing better than he's ever played, that's saying a lot because he's an excellent player.
Stephen A. Smith, brother, fix your face. Paul George is definitely playing better than he's ever played in the NBA right now, as of right now. I'm not sure if he's ever averaged 26 or 27 points a game this late into the season.
Is the fifth best guy at his position. Because you can call LeBron a 3, KD a 3, Kawhi a 3, the Greek Freak a 3. You can call them all 3s. That puts Paul George is not as, let me just be very clear about this. He's excellent. He is in that category, kind of. All 4 of those guys are better than Paul George at basketball. That's the way it is. But Paul George
both ends?
Yeah. Okay. Those guys are,
No, not on both ends. You see how quick Max Kellerman tried to say yeah? No, sir. And we're talking about it in regards to being a two-way player. Paul George is much better on defense than LeBron James. Now, we know Kawhi Leonard is non-pareil on both ends. So, of course, he'd be above Paul George. But the disparity is not that great. KD is great on both ends. Giannis, I think, is a stretch to call him a pure 3. I think that Giannis could play 3, 4, or the 5.
Paul George more consistent defender than LeBron now, but you'd rather have LeBron than Paul George, obviously. And I will say, but Paul George is great. He's a great player. Westbrook?
He's very good. These guys throw around these superlatives so easily. Great and superstar and all this other shit. How do you differentiate between LeBron James and Jimmy Butler if everybody's great and everybody's a superstar?
He's already had KD and couldn't get it done. Is Paul George as good as KD? No. KD's better than Paul George. They're similar in certain ways. KD's better. So we already know he needs a little more than he had, and he has a little less now.
Well, I'll say this, because you're making a very good assertion. Russell Westbrook already had Kevin Durant, and they were unable to get it done. If I was Stephen A. Smith, I would rebut that by saying we've already seen what a great coach can do with the same team over in Milwaukee, what Budenholzer is doing with the Milwaukee Bucks right now. So is it an issue with coaching? That's the real question. Because Russell Westbrook is also an older, more experienced player, so we would expect him to be a better player. We would expect him to make better decisions, as well as Paul George. So that might make up for the lessening in talent that they would have had 5 years ago with KD and Westbrook.
I will tell you, they ain't going to win the championship this year, barring some catastrophic injury on other teams. Knock wood, that doesn't happen.
I would not be shocked if OKC got to the finals. Golden State is not head and shoulders above anybody in the NBA anymore. They are not.
Now look at James Harden. James Harden, who plays at an MVP caliber, who during the regular season, you could argue that's the most valuable player in basketball. He is...
James Harden, one of the best regular season players I've ever seen.
Now without Chris Paul oftentimes, and last year won 65 games, I thought should have won the whole thing. I thought they were the best. What happened when Chris Paul went down? No one could hit a shot, including James Harden. Harden is going to go down in history as one of the greatest chokers who ever lived.
That's a bit of a stretch, Max Kellerman. You're going a little bit too far now.
If he doesn't prove it in the postseason,
You know what's funny? Max Kellerman will call James Harden one of the greatest chokers in the history of the NBA. But his boy LeBron James had the biggest choke job in the history of the NBA, really in the history of professional sports for any superstar. Because at least if you're a great quarterback and you go to the Super Bowl and you have a bad game, that's just one bad game. This guy LeBron James had a terrible series. And yet we're constantly told that LeBron James is better than Michael Jordan, that he's the greatest NBA player ever, that he's light years ahead of everybody. Like, give me a break.
So during the regular season, what I'm saying in totality this year, there's more pressure on Harden to not choke, just be the guy you normally are.
Well, he can't be that guy in the postseason because they call the game differently in the postseason. And his game is so dependent on getting foul calls. I'm not quite sure if I've ever seen a perimeter player whose game was as dependent on getting foul calls as James Harden's game is.
In the playoffs, where he's going to get, like the way we talk about Peyton Manning, and Peyton Manning at least won 2 Super Bowls. But we think about Peyton Manning's underachieving under pressure. There are guys like that. Where has there been a drop-off from regular season to playoffs like Harden?
Listen, when I look about...
You're overrating James Harden's drop-off. And look, I get on James too, but you're going a little too hard on the man. You have to understand the importance of him getting foul calls. Even with all the foul calls that James Harden gets, he's still a 44% shooter on average. So that means what? With all the foul calls that he gets that he does not deserve, he's probably really more like a 40% shooter. When you take him to the playoffs and he's not getting those calls, his shooting percentage is going to drop because his foul calls are going to drop.
About Harden, I didn't think Harden choked in last year's playoffs. He did. There was a couple of times in the postseason. He played better. He played better defensively. He dropped 32 in Game 7. Only shot 2 of 13 from 3-point range. So I get it. 2 of 13 from 3-point. Wasn't 0 for 12 like Trevor Ariza. But it was 2 of 13. He finished 2 of 13 from 3-point range. But he was hitting the 2-point shots. Finished with 32 points. You're going up against the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah, Harden did not choke last year. That's why I stated I would stop calling him James Hardhead. Sometimes I still do out of a reflex. It's James Harden, okay? He did not choke last year. His problem is that it's very difficult for him to move past his performance against the Spurs 2 years ago.
He wasn't himself, meaning that he didn't play up to his level.
As usual.
But again, I've seen him worse, is my point. I've seen him worse.
He's trending in the right direction.
Last year that wasn't the case. I'm not going to hold him accountable for last year like that.
I am.
What I would tell you is this. I'm not expecting anything from James Harden and the Houston Rockets if CP3 ain't healthy.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something, Stephen Naismith. I'm not expecting anything from the Rockets whether CP3 is healthy or not. But then again, let me say this. The West is wide open right now. Okay, don't let anything fool you. I would still pick the Warriors, but if the Warriors were to get knocked out in the second or third round in a shocking series or in a quote unquote shocking upset to the OKC Thunder or even to the Denver Nuggets, it would not shock me. I'm telling you, it would not shock me. I need to see a visible jump in intensity from them come playoff time, because right now I'm not seeing it. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt because they have a championship pedigree, of course. But I need to see how they look in the first round of the playoffs this year before I make a true determination on how far I think they can go. Once again, as of right now, I'm still sticking with the Warriors, but it would not shock me if they get knocked off in the second or third round by any one of these teams in the Western Conference that I would consider a top 6 team. Denver, OKC, the Rockets, the Lakers, it would not shock me.
But I'm looking at Westbrook and Paul George, and with the pieces that Sam Presti has put together, and you look at they're top in the Western Conference for a reason.
Man, I want to bring something up.
All right, last word.
Big games like, I don't know, a Game 7 at home against the best team in basketball, defending champions. At home, missing your second best player. Great players don't shoot 2 for it. They sometimes do, but not who have never achieved under pressure.
I once saw a great player score 8 points in a game.
Hold on.
Tell him, Steve. Who you talking about, Steve? Who's that great player? Is that guy who they say is better than Jordan?
Hold on. But Harden has never had the big moment when he needed it the most. So you say 2 for 13 from 3, right? Go 5 from 13 from 3. You're in overtime.
Okay,
Go 6 for 13. You win the series.
He needs to show up in the playoffs. Rockets are 1-5 without Chris Paul this season.
You don't know that.
When we come back.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. As Stephen A. Smith put so well, there was a player who scored 8 points in a finals game and had the worst performance of any quote-unquote superstar ever. James Harden, to me, is not a superstar. The problem is that these television pundits, they put these terms on these players before they earn them. They call them superstars before they deserve the title, and then they get upset with them when they fail in big moments. James Harden and Russell Westbrook, they're not superstars, they're stars. They're high-level stars, but they're just stars, they're not superstars. There are only 3 superstars in the NBA. Kawhi is a borderline superstar. You know, I might give Kawhi the superstar title. I might give him that. But the 3 definitive superstars, LeBron, Steph Curry, KD. That's it. But anyway, peace.